Hello, my name is Monica. I'm the Farm to School Director here at Guidestone, Colorado, up at Salida. And I'm here today to tell you a little bit about transplants. So whether you are purchasing transplants out in the world from a nursery or another farm, or if you're raising some yourself, I wanted to give you some of the details about when do you know when it's time to plant, what things can take some of the cold weather that we might still have up here at 7,000 feet, and how do you properly harden them off and get them ready to take sort of the wind, the heat, the cold, and all of the things that our high altitude environment is going to throw at them. So we've talked before about starting things in a germination chamber. This might be a warm windowsill for you. We have some things that we start on a heat mat, so things that really like it warm, like tomatoes and peppers and basil, or some of our flowers like zinnias. We start right onto a heat mat. We have 2 5-foot long heat mats, but you can also get one at garden stores that just holds 1 tray if that fits your scale better. When things start to actually germinate, we're watching to make sure that once they start having leaves, we make sure that they're in a place where they have good light. If they don't get moved to good light very quickly, they get really tall and leggy, and that makes for weaker stems and weaker transplants overall. So once we move them up into the light, we're looking at them to see how much of a root ball have they formed. And so once they've germinated, we're going to move them to more light, and we might move them to a cooler area. So we start ours on that heat mat. They're in a wrapped chamber so that they stay extra warm at night, even if they're not directly on the mat. And then we move them out onto a different rack that isn't wrapped. So this rack, it still gets a little bit more airflow. Sometimes we set up fans in different parts of the greenhouse so that they can start to get used to having a little bit of like wind and things on them. They dry out a little bit better. And then we're starting to look at them to see when they make a really good root ball. And so when we have one with a good root ball, it means that we have roots that are going all the way down to the bottom of the cell, but that aren't spiraling. We want to get them before they become root bound. And when they're root bound, the roots spiral all the way around the edge of the cell over and over, and then they're less likely to spread out into the surrounding soil when we transplant them. And they're also really hard to get out of the cell at that point. So that's sort of what we're looking for. When we're pretty close and maybe they're not quite ready to be transplanted, we want to start hardening them off. And so that might mean taking them outside just for part of the day. It might mean putting them from a warmer greenhouse or from your house into an unheated high tunnel that might have a little bit more temperature variations. It might get a little warmer during the day, but a little colder at night. There are some things like brassicas and chard and onions, and so brassicas would be broccoli and kale and cabbage and kohlrabi and bok choy. Those things, they're able to take some light frost. So they're not super cold tolerant when they're babies. You don't want them to get a really hard frost on them, but they can start to stay out overnight on some of our warmer nights. And you can cover them with row cover, or if you don't have row cover, you can use an old sheet. That will allow some light through it, and then at least just cover them at night when it might get really cold. When we do go put them outside, we like to keep them really close together because that helps them be protected from the wind a little bit. It also makes it easier for us to cover them. And I usually like to have them outside for several days, maybe even a week before I actually transplant them, so that if there is a really cold night that I wasn't expecting, I can bring them back inside if I need to. And so this time of year, like usually in Salida, our last frost date is the very end of May or very beginning of June. The other thing I'm looking for is I don't like to plant out tomatoes and melons and squash and things that are frost tender or basil until all of the snow is gone off of Methodist Mountain. So that's another way that you can look at it. But starting in late May, you can start to look at the 10-day forecast and see if it's going to be really cold before you transplant things out. I know it's really easy to get excited with all the plant sales happening about getting a lot of stuff planted and putting it out there, but we want to hope that you all don't put things out too early. So speaking of plant sales, let's go back inside for a second. We have 2 pre-order plant sales through Guidestone. The first one will take place, the pickups will happen on Friday, May 14th from 3 to 6 p.m. And the order form will be posted this coming Friday on May 7th and at guidestonecolorado.org, and you can go on there, you can see all the different varieties. We have some broccoli, we have some lettuce, we have some kale, we have some cabbage. We will have a few other things coming up in the next plant sale, which will be June 5th. We'll have more tomatoes then. We'll have some basil and peppers and cucumbers and zucchini. So remember that part of the reason we're not doing tons of options of warm season crops like tomatoes and peppers in the May 14th sale is we hope people don't get too excited and go planting them out and losing them. So we'll have a couple of those sorts of things available, but mostly we'll save those for June 5th. Hope that you guys keep listening and watching for more tips on how to have a really successful garden, and have a great season.